Welcome to Emergency Medicine Match Advice, a Google Hangout web series sponsored by Academic Life and Emergency Medicine, and its editor-in-chief, my favorite medical educator, Dr. Michelle Lin from UCSF. Good afternoon, Michelle.
Hey guys, welcome, welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so am I. Today's topic is entitled Making the Perfect Rank Order List. And to help you make that perfect list, we have three outstanding program directors with us today. Dr. Colleen Roche from George Washington University, Dr. Jonathan Davis from Georgetown University, Washington Hospital Center, and Dr. Brian Stettler from the University of Cincinnati.
Good, how are you?
So thanks for being with us, you guys. Today, panel, our task is simple. We're going to provide some tips and tricks that will help the students make the perfect rank list. And students, I'm going to propose that the perfect rank list is really made through a 5-step process that's already begun. It began with the selection of which programs you wanted to apply to. Your perfect rank list will inevitably reflect some degree of geographic or institutional preferences depending where you fall in a spectrum of being entirely location-driven or entirely program-driven. I think most students fall somewhere in the middle with a mix of programs based on location, perceived fit, competitiveness, reputation, and certainly just information that you get from your advisors. Now, your second step is to pare down your list to the final number of programs that you plan to visit during interview season. If you were strategic about where you applied and had a good mix of programs that reflect variable levels of competitiveness and perhaps geography, you're likely that you're going to have the ability to decline some interview offers. And you're going to get to that magic number of 10 to 15 interviews that we recommended in several of our previous Hangouts. Now, we're taping this session in early October, so most students who view this Hangout in the next few weeks will be actively dealing with step number 2. However, now that the application process is behind you and hopefully your stress level is a little bit better now that you've started receiving some interview offers, this is the ideal time to prepare for the final 3 steps necessary to make that perfect list. For step 3, you simply need to decide what information you want to gather on the interview trail. Everyone's list is going to be a little different. Different things are important to different members of your class and certainly will be of variable importance to you. Everyone's rank list is like a fingerprint, and to figure out what's going to be important to you requires some preparation because the information gathering process necessary for this is really an active learning process. You can't expect to show up on interview day and passively absorb all the information that's necessary for you to make the best, most personally authentic rank list decisions for yourself. Now, step 4 is actually getting information on interview day. It requires you to process tons of data that's being thrown at you and distill it down to what really matters to you. And we're going to talk about how to do that during our Hangout today. And then step 5 is actually sitting down and making your list. And this is a really easy step for some students, but certainly is very challenging for other students. It's far easier for the students, I think, who go out on the trail well prepared with questions ahead of time. They know what information that they want to get. So that means you need a game plan for how to think about your list before you even set foot out on the interview trail. So thinking about the title of this installment, Making the Perfect Rank List, you might think at first glance that this is a task that would be easily put off until the end of the interview season in February. But we're deliberately taping this Hangout before interview season starts because I think to make that perfect list, you need to consider steps 3 and 4 very carefully. What information do I need to gather when I visit these programs, and how do I go about getting that information? So this session is meant to help you prepare for interview season and hopefully to make this as an enjoyable, efficient, and productive process as it can be. I will mention that we do have some references associated with this Hangout on the Academic Life website. And if I simply read the titles, you're going to get a sense of the theme of these articles. They're entitled Factors That Influence Medical Student Selection of an EM Program, EM Residency Applicant Views on the Interview Day Process, Emergency Medicine Residency Selection Factors Influencing Candidate Decision, and Factors Applicants Value When Selecting an EM Residency. So clearly a theme to that set of articles, which I recommend that you all skim as you begin to think about this process. Also included online are 2 blog posts on the Academic Life website on the topic How to Make Your Rank List, one by Nikita Joshi in 2013 and one by Dr. Michelle Lin herself in 2010. So I recommend reading those as well. So with that introduction, let's get some tips and tricks from our guest program directors today. And we're going to start with Dr. Roche from George Washington. And just to kind of get us started, Colleen, I'd like you to talk about what information the student should expect to hear about on interview day. Just maybe make a broad strokes list of what information program directors generally provide.
Colleen, are you muted? Can anyone else hear Colleen?
Nope.
No, ma'am.
Am I muted now?
You're
now
on. Perfect.
Good.
We can
Nice.
hear you. All right.
Looked like you had a lot to say.
And that concludes
Sage
our
advice.
hangout.
Sage advice.
That's right.
Hope you didn't miss that.
Okay, so I think going into the interview process, you're going to go to all these different programs and you're going to learn a ton of different things about them. I think some of the standard things that we all talk about are the different emergency departments that we rotate through, and then a lot about what the faculty is doing, what the residents are doing, and kind of the overall sense and mission of what our departments are. And, you know, we're gonna talk about a lot of sexy things. We're gonna talk about ultrasound and international medicine and things that might not be really apparent from our websites, but are, you know, hot topics and people are interested in. What you will sometimes get some information about, and some information might be limited, are on some lesser or less sexy topics. So maybe your interest is healthcare disparities, or maybe you're interested in becoming a leader in administration. These things kind of sometimes have to be teased out because there's so much information to be had that you can't, it's not necessarily readily apparent.
So all the administrators out there are really sad because you think they're not sexy. So that's too bad.
That's kind of true.
All the aspiring administrators. So you touched on one interesting point. You said that some information that you share won't readily available on websites, and I think students can get information about programs in a number of different ways, but certainly websites that the program provides information on SAM and the residency catalog, FRIDA. Even going to residency fairs at ASAP and SAM, you'll be able to get a different flavor for some of the information. You'll see some life brought to the statistics. But what information is presented really only on interview day that the students have to pay attention to when they're in the room?
I guess my experience is from what the information I'm giving is, and I think that what I'm giving on interview day that's different, and Brian and John might disagree with me, but it's really the depth of what we're doing in our department. So not just saying we have an international mission and a global health mission and a public health mission, trying to kind of really relay all the multiple layers of things as a program director that I'm giving each of the applicants to understand better. I think the other things that the other information that they can really expect to get is on the side of the residents. And the residents are going to be giving them things that are so different from what the program director is going to be giving them. But a lot of that is the number of shifts, which rotation's great, what we like to do for fun together, those sorts of things.
Well, which of those things, the factors that they're hearing about on interview day, that they're reading in websites, in the end, since we're talking about making the perfect rank list, what parts of these presentations, what factors are really going to matter most to the candidates so they can kind of pay attention when those things get talked about in the PD presentation?
Well, Mike, like you said, I think it's different for each person. So what might be great for you is going to be different for me. I think, though, the most important thing that every applicant walks away from is getting a sense of what the philosophy of the department is. And what the philosophy of my department is and the philosophy of the next department, they may be completely different, but understanding what our mission is and what the overall goal there, I think, is really important. There are a lot of little pieces of information, and I think we're going to touch on this, but from the number of patients that get seen in the emergency department to the number of shifts that you work to the number of, how long the shifts are, that can get a little bit confusing and be part of what kind of debunks people a little bit, but that's part of all the information that you get. The most important thing is that you believe in the philosophy of the program you're really looking at.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that students, when they go out on the trail, need to be able to articulate, why does this program exist? What are they good at? What are their faculty really proud of? What's their philosophy? What's their reason for being? If you leave a program at the end of the day and you can't really articulate that, perhaps that message wasn't there to begin with, and that can certainly influence the way that you're going to rank the program at the end. But perhaps you have to kind of dig deeper while you're in your interviews and get past the how many central lines do I do, and really understand what it is about GW or Cincinnati that makes them tick, that makes them get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, mentioning you are going to get that information about how many central lines you do and how many patients you see an hour and how many weekend shifts you work. But I think that that's such not as important. I'm trying to choose my words properly, but it's not as important because no matter, you know, how you look at it, at the end of the day, you're going to be able to take care of CHF. You're going to be able to put in a central line. You're going to be able to do all of these things in the programs out there. But what's going to make you feel motivated to come to work as a resident? Like, is this the place? And that really centers around the philosophy and the opportunity that exists for you and your career goals.
Okay, well, that's great, and I think it's a perfect segue to some of the questions that I have for Dr. Davis. And for John, I'd like to turn it around a little bit for you. Colleen just described a few of the sort of major data points, pieces of information, factors that the students can take away on interview day. But there's a lot of information overload, and probably certain parts of the presentation really just don't matter. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not only information overload, but it really is a lot of redundancy in information, because I can't tell you how many times, you know, I experienced this myself, and also talking with applicants season after season. It's just that one program begins to sound like another program, and you really do get overwhelmed with information. And so the key as an applicant is really trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, just trying to figure out the key things that are important to you. And one thing that I've noticed is during the course of the season, there's sort of a growth and a maturation in the applicant as well in terms of what they're looking for in a program. And I always tell people that, you know, what you think that you might want in training might look quite different after experiencing 10 interview days and 10 program director presentations and meeting and speaking with people on the field. So it's kind of a moving target. But I think most importantly, the things that Colleen spoke to, you know, number one, it's really all about the, you know, I sort of categorize it as the three P's of a program: the people, the passions, and then the philosophy. And you know, those are the core things that I think are you really got to focus on, and you got to separate those important things from a lot of the mis and disinformation that's out there. So a couple of points. You know, there's a lot of information that you get that really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And I think point one is we all need to trust the RRC. You know, fortunately, emergency medicine, we're leaders within the house of medicine. Many things that we do educationally and in other veins, we really lead the charge in the house of medicine with many things. Look at the EM milestones, and I can tell you that the RRC in emergency medicine does a really good job at making sure that every program that's out there, any applicant, any resident at any one of those training programs is going to get a great training experience and really learn the core content of emergency medicine. So a lot of that guesswork is taken out for the applicant. Fortunately, it's taken out of the equation for you, because you're going to get adequate and great training any place that you go. And really, it's the nuance and looking at the people, the particular passions of the program, and also the training philosophy, how they're going to go about teaching you the skills, the tools that you need to be successful as an emergency physician. So point number one, trust the RRC. Point two, it really is an important point to me. It's all about the definitions, and you'll get bombarded with information about percentage of critical care, percentage of admissions, etc. But it really, just like with anything else, it really depends on the definition that's used to derive that data. And a perfect example is that two of our shops, we always quote this 3 to 4% critical care admission rate. But it really depends on the definition, because at one of our shops, 3 to 4% critical care really underballs the amount of critical patients we have in the ED, because it just so happens that that hospital has highly specialized units that can care for critically ill patients, but it's not defined as an ICU. It's really a step-down unit. On the converse side, another hospital where our residents train, there is no step-down unit. So things that might not go to an ICU at another hospital will wind up in an ICU at that particular hospital. So looking at these numbers, you really kind of get lost in this sea of gray, because the definitions are really important. But at the end of the day, the training program wouldn't exist without having an adequate exposure for the trainees to critical procedures, critical care, and everything that one needs to see during the course of training. So that's point 2. Really be cautious about the definitions and these percentages and these raw numbers that you're provided with during the interview process. Point 3, and Colleen really hit on this as well, there's really no one-size-fits-all answer. And a perfect example of this, I remember speaking with a candidate a couple of years ago, and this candidate was very, very focused on whether or not there was a burn rotation, not only at our program, but at every single program where they interviewed, because they were told early in the interview process by a senior resident at a program that did offer a burn rotation that that was a critical piece of training. And don't go to a place that doesn't have a burn rotation is what was relayed to this candidate. So it was a very important aspect of a curriculum for this candidate, but at the end of the day, there are some programs where you might get a better burn experience, but there's no program in the land where you're not going to get the burn experience you need to be able to safely and effectively take care of patients with burn injuries. So that's one of those nuanced areas. And again, you know, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. And so information overload is the norm. I can tell you my own personal experience after going to probably a dozen interviews on the trail. You know, I was just bombarded, overloaded with information. I took diligent notes, as many of us do. That's what got us into medical school and got us into a point where we're applying for emergency medicine in the first place. But what do you do with all this information? And so I think the final point, point 4, is really trust your gut. And I can tell you, when I personally sat down, and Brian's going to talk about, you know, actually formulating a rank list, but what I personally did, I used my gut impression. I threw out reams of data regarding each and every program that I'd taken diligent notes, looked up stuff on websites, spoken with various people. I just went with my gut impression about what I felt about those places. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well.
Well, I think that it's important that, you know, at least what I tell my students is that you don't make one of those spreadsheets where it says how many ICU months or how many rotating medicine months do you do, and or you know how many what percentage of the residents are married and which ones are unmarried. Like when you make a spreadsheet like that, you're just going to get yourself lost in so many details, and there's no right answer. It's trying to kind of filter all that information that surrounds each program and take what's right there in your gut and go for it.
Now I'm just curious to see Jonathan's notes.
Yeah. I still have them. If anyone wants to see them, you know, I can.
Well, I imagine his Excel spreadsheet has, you know, number of burn units,
Right.
you know, columns for P number 1, P number 2, P number 3.
That's right. Exactly.
Points
You know, you should see the x-axis is only, you know, I mean the y-axis is only so many, but that x-axis goes out quite far with many, many data points. But it's only column AA-X that matters, right? It's you know, the final gut impression, what you felt at the end of the day.
All right. So Jonathan's summary is there's 4 columns. There's PPP and gut, and you know, you just take broad notes and you're going to get there at the end. Is that?
That is, you know, much better than I was able to say it. Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to get to that gut feeling, because I think that's an important point that we're all going to hit on. But let's take a moment and switch over to Dr. Stettler from Cincinnati, and just broad strokes, blank slate. How do you advise your students to make their rank order list?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean, pretty much everyone has touched on it to this point. When a student comes into the office and sits down and kind of drops down the Jonathan-esque ream of notes and says, what do I do with this? The first question you always ask is, what's important to you? Because every single one of us thinks that our program is number 1, and it probably is for a number of students, and it's not for every student. So ultimately, you have to turn that question back and say, what's most important to you? What are you actually looking for in a program? And start from there. And that's actually the most difficult part for the student typically, because they actually have, I mean, people who go into emergency medicine tend to be pretty perceptive, but they don't always have a defined, this is what I'm looking for. And it may not be, it may be critical care, it may be international medicine. They have some gestalt of it, but they really don't have a framework on which to base it. So they have their gut instinct, but then all that other data is just very difficult to bring together. And that's kind of where you're starting is, okay, we're going to evaluate your gut because that's a huge portion of this, but we also need to look for, what are you trying to get out of this? What inspires you? What is going to make you want to come to work every day?
Yeah, it's so much noise to filter, and you know, what filter you apply is really a personal thing. And as you say, there's no number one program. There is going to be a number one program. It's the number one program on your list, which is going to look very different than the number one program that's going to be on Michelle's list or Colleen's list or John's list. And it really, becomes your filter and how you apply it to all the information, all the noise that you hear. That's what's going to ring true in the end. In terms of making the list, sometimes students will come in and they'll tell me, this program called me. We're going to have an entire separate hangout on the post-interview communication. But this program called me, and I really felt like I got along with those residents, and I want to match there, and I want them to rank me 1. But if I put this other program above that program, will it change my chances of ending up there? And they believe that there's a way to game the NRMP. So can you kind of give your impression on that, and what sort of the what rules do you give them?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because everybody wants to be loved, right? I mean, this stems from, I think, junior high when no one would ask me to the dance. I want to be loved too. But at the end of the day, it actually makes very little difference in the list because the algorithm, the match algorithm, is really quite simple and works really, really well. I mean, I tell students, in the same way that you can't game the system in Vegas, you can't game the system with the match. And the best thing to do is decide what programs you value most, put those in the order in which you think that you would most prefer to be there, and put every program on the list at which you interviewed that you could possibly see yourself working there. And if you're not going to put somebody on the list, the question is always, is unemployment better? That's basically the question, and everything else has to be on the list. And you can't try to say, okay, Stettler he was kind of winking at me throughout the interview. I think maybe this guy likes me. Ultimately, that doesn't make any difference. If you liked another program better, that's the program that should be at the top of your list, and you kind of move down from there. The match algorithm actually favors the applicant from beginning to end. It starts with the applicant's list and then goes down to match them. And so the applicants really have a significant sense of power here, and they should put the list of programs exactly as they want to see them.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point that I think sometimes is confusing when you're first starting to get your head around this match, that it isn't about trying to match who likes you and gaming the system. It's really putting your preferences first, and the algorithm will favor you. I think that's a very, very important point. I spoke earlier about applicants sometimes being entirely location-driven and others being entirely program-driven. I think there's also folks that are entirely driven by the details and the information, and they're going to go where they perceive the best training based on all of that sort of noise that we talked about. Then there's others who perhaps overlook some of the parts of the noise that are important. They're just going to go with their gut feeling. Where do you fall in the middle of those spectrums?
Yeah, I think you already said it perfectly. I mean, it probably is somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, depending on what you're looking for. I mean, the whole geography and location thing is one of the things that is the most exciting and or the most frustrating for program directors, right? I mean, the day before interviews, I always scatter a bunch of sand on my floor and in the chairs, just so people will think I just came from the beach, even though there's no beach in Cincinnati, but I figure that's a subliminal message. I mean, geography is a tough one. It doesn't matter as much as you want it to, because you really would like to work a few shifts and then go surf or hike or whatever, but the reality is residency is hard and it's a lot of hours, and you're just not going to get as much time outdoors as you want. But geography does make a difference if you have family that you need to be close to, or you have a significant other who has a job in a specific market that is only available in one geographic location. So it does make a difference, but at the same point in time, those other factors of what are you looking for in a program educationally, because this is a very defined time period, right? I mean, it's 3 or 4 years, and ultimately you need to get educationally everything that you can out of that program, really, really get to what inspires you in emergency medicine and kind of take it from there. So it should be a marriage. It should be a 50-50 or so of what do I need from geography if that's something I need, and if I don't have a lot of geographic needs, then you really have the ideal world of just focusing on what educationally do I want.
Yeah, I mean, everyone says location, 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 and I think we all recognize that geography tends to be the prime driver in many of these matches. But I think to skip over some of the program features that, again, are going to resonate to your particular filter, that are going to impact what your number one should feel like, that gut feeling. I think to overlook that is probably a mistake. I usually use the example with our students of Chicago, right? Chicago is a place where a lot of these students have spent their entire lives, right? They could go to college here, they could go to med school here, and they have Cubs season tickets, and they really just want to live in Chicago forever. And that's great. There's 6 programs in Chicago, but those 6 programs are very different. And it doesn't really make much sense to me when those 6 programs are just ordered 1 through 6, because they just don't seem the same. And perhaps, there's going to be programs elsewhere in the Midwest or in the Southeast that look more like certain programs, and shouldn't geography start to become less and less important if you're going to end up at a place that just doesn't fit your personality?
Absolutely.
Holly, you look like you're about to...
Yeah, I've been wanting to say this. When you talk about geography, I think that some of the other kind of medical specialties, it's known that if you are going to become a surgeon and you're going to move to Washington, D.C., chances are you're going to get into a practice in that Washington, D.C. area. A lot of, your opportunities, the people that you're going to meet, how you're going to develop your kind of your next practice. But with emergency medicine, you can train anywhere geographically and work anywhere almost geographically in this country. And you are not tied where you're going to spend your next 3 to 4 years forever. And who knows, you'll go there and maybe fall in love or decide that this is the right place for you. But just because you shouldn't pick a program just because of geography is what I'm trying to say. You really do need to figure out how you want to be the best doctor and what's going to help you get there. And you can go live, in Southern California in 3 or 4 years from now and forever. But to be the doctor you want to be might not be happening in that particular location that you love.
And I think I agree that is such a hugely important point. I remember as a medical student specifically being counseled that if this is an area where you want to end up and you want to establish your quote-unquote practice, you really need to train in that area. And as Colleen said, it's just not true for emergency medicine. But from the medical school perspective, oftentimes you're being advised by deans who are not emergency physicians. And that might be true for surgical subspecialists and for other fields, but emergency medicine really is a skill and a practice that you can establish anywhere. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, growing up in Maryland, right outside of D.C., I moved to the Bay Area, got my first job in the Bay Area, and then was looking back to move to D.C. It was no problem having trained on the West Coast trying to move back east. It really was, fine. It was just a lot of applications from a lot of different places, but that wasn't seen as a negative trying to move to another geographic location. And as Brian said as well, it's a prescribed period of time. And, trying to find the best experience for you as an individual, and Mike, you hit on this as well. It's, not necessarily the 6 programs in Chicago because they're so incredibly different. So how can one individual like those programs that much to put them 1 through 6? Perhaps it's the case, but again, there's probably other programs out there that are more similar to your number 1 choice on that list.
Really, they just like the Cubs so much that they. I don't blame them.
It's been a rough go for them. I feel bad for them.
Like being a NASDAQ.
Their standings don't matter. Doesn't matter. Still have to love them. Michelle, I want to stop there. I got a couple other follow-up questions, but I want to sort of hear your thoughts on the conversation so far.
Well, I think this is a really robust discussion so far, and it seems like we're all kind of teaching a similar theme, right? Which is, keep a very open mind. Don't go with just the what's and the numbers, but more of the why and how and the philosophy of a program. I think you guys all said it so well. I do want to jump on to piggyback on what John said about geography, which is, I got one of the best advice ever when I was applying for residency, and it's kind of like anti-geography preferences. So basically what it is, I did Stanford for 4 years for college and then 5 years for med school, and then someone says, you know what, you need to just, I knew I was going to want to come back to the Bay Area, and they said, you know what, you just need to get out of the Bay Area. You want to get some diversity, you want to get a sense of different practices out there. I mean, granted, I didn't get too far. I made it to California. I know.
Everyone watching this knows you went to LA, so
different country.
All right. Point noted.
So I went pretty far. I went really far. But you know, it's kind of, think about it. Not so much of, like, again, like you said, it's not about where you want to eventually practice. Get some diversity. Get some different experiences. For instance, live in a different time zone, which, you know, not what I did, but live in a different time zone. See what it's like. So I do really enjoy all of these comments. I do want to throw a question out there, which unfortunately I didn't tell any of the panelists about, that I was going to ask, because it just came up, which is, you guys all mentioned about all this overwhelming data that's coming out at you about numbers and stats, and all these residents are giving you information about shifts. That I can see the appeal of a single listing by an organization of all of the different programs from 1 to 150 plus. You know, how great is that? They boiled everything down for me. I can just, like, go down the list, and I'm just going to apply to, like, every odd number or every prime number, or I don't know, whatever you want to do. But it certainly has some appeal. And, you know, I mentioned doximity because it's a very hot topic right now. And I'm just curious what you guys' thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think it's oh, go ahead, Mike.
No,
I was going to say, you know, this is a very important topic, and I can't tell you, even before the doximity survey, which, you know, fortunately, for those of you who don't know or haven't seen yet, there is a survey out there that attempts to sort of stratify and rank programs. And, you know, fortunately, one of our governing bodies for residency programs, the Council of Residency Directors, actually came out with a very reasonable statement how the methodology used to collect this data is really worthless. And it really underscores some of the things that we've been talking about, that, you know, there is no one-size-fits-all for every single applicant going into emergency medicine. I think that's a key point. And even prior to the doximity survey, I can't tell you how many times we have medical students sort of in March, April of their third year of medical school who are deciding on which places to apply for away rotations. And they'll come in, they'll march into my office or someone else's office and say, hey, I just want to get a sense of the best programs that are out there. And I always tell them that that's a really difficult question to answer, because there's 160 plus different programs out there. Fortunately, in emergency medicine, there is no bad program, and really, let's talk about what you're looking for and what your goals are for training for your future, and then that would be a better way of sort of assessing which ones might be a great fit for you as an individual, as opposed to just a raw listing of the best programs. You know, in general, I can tell you, and I'd be interested in others' experience with this as well, there's a lot of programs, you know, the more popular the geographic location, certainly more applicants tend to flock to those programs. But with that said, programs throughout the country, you know, fortunately, in our specialty, a lot of programs get a lot of applicants, which is a great thing.
Colleen.
I agree again with Jonathan almost 100%, and I don't want to echo him. I think that it all boils down to, well, we each one as individuals, and so you could say that one program is better than another, but it's really, really difficult. When I kind of look at my spectrum of medical students and they come to sit with me, and I look at what all their strengths and their weaknesses are and what they want out of life, I can get a sense of what programs they should be looking at a lot. But that can't be put onto a list that works for every resident, and I think it kind of undermines the whole process and what we're trying to do as educators and deliver different ways to be educated to be an emergency physician. Thanks.
Brian.
I'm learning a lot just from what everybody's saying. I don't know. I'm actually going to go around and start applying.
But, you know, I do want to point out, since I think this video is going to live on past this current 2014-15 interview cycle, you know, we're referencing the 2014 doximity ranking. And hopefully, if doximity is listening out there, that methodology will change if they keep a ranking at all. And I actually hope they get rid of a ranking for us, because just 6 months ago at the SAM Medical Student Symposium, I went on and on about how awesome it is that there's no rankings in emergency medicine, because it seems like all the folks in surgery and medicine are so stressed out about who's number 1 and who's number 2, and, you know, all their applications center around that, and it was great to just not have that burden me when I was applying. But for this particular cycle, the doximity rankings were based entirely on physician vote. And if you look at who got ranked, it was the oldest programs with the most alumni, who probably have the most votes. And I think, there's been a lot of statements made by the major organizations in emergency medicine as one collective voice that that's probably not a very valid way to rank programs. But, to the student listening to this in 2016, perhaps the rankings will be different then. I want to present a case to each of you, and Michelle, I'm going to actually go to you first with this. So a student comes to your office, they finished all their interviews, and they're at a total loss, right? Like they were the ones suffering from information overload the entire time. They were those personalities in med school that liked everything. They liked surgery and medicine and pediatrics. They became emergency medicine as their choice for specialty, and now they kind of think every program they saw was great. So they're having a really tough time making their decisions. How do you help them with their thought process and try to weed through all of that?
Yeah, well, that is a loaded question. I give them first your phone number, and then
I'll make everyone's list for them. That's not a problem. But that's not my role.
What will start with, though? What will it start with?
Exactly. Well, I think after we kind of hang up on a broadcast, maybe the 5 of us will build kind of the alternative to Doximity's top, 160 program list, and we can put that out there, and then I'll just go off of that list. But,
DW is number 1.
Well, clearly. I already had that already. That's already a permanent marker.
We already have 1 through 4 set, so we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
So, yes, what would I do? Interestingly, I think this is a time to think back and have them reflect back, because this is not a novel process, this application, right? They needed to do this to get into med school. So kind of step back and say, what was it about medical school that really got you excited? What were the elements that you were interested in? And for me, interestingly, it turned out to be about the way I learned. So if an educational curriculum is geared more towards shorter talks, more hands-on, like that kind of spoke to me. So I kind of kept an ear out for that. So I try to tease out these elements. For instance, if I had a lot of great female mentors during medical school, and I'm like, that is exactly what I want for residency. So I kind of tease out these common threads that I know I already liked, and if you can kind of extract that from the student, try to then reframe it and then into the list of the chaotic list that they have, and try to see if anything kind of shakes out to the top. So that'd be kind of my general approach, is to sit down with them, figure out what are the elements that they loved about medical school, and then translate that into their application list.
Okay, Colleen, in the same question, perhaps adding pearls and pitfalls as we go through this.
I think that I'm going to maybe start with a pitfall, but one of the biggest pitfalls that people do is listen to their peers. So me and John both interview at Northwestern, and we decide, like, I think it's the greatest place in sliced bread, and he says, well, the residents are miserable. I don't like them there. And then it kind of starts to influence you and your feelings about a program, because your friend John thinks, you kind of stink. And so I think that everyone needs to realize that what is going to work for you in a program is going to be different for the next person, and not to listen to what other people's kind of negative comments or things that they don't particularly like, unless they're truly alarming, and everybody says the same thing, but I think that that's unusual. I think the majority of programs most people like and they're happy with. So I think that to kind of get yourself stuck in that and listen to what the next guy says is bad. The other thing is, when you might go to an interview day and love everybody that you meet and think this is the program, this is where I want to go, and then you meet one weird resident or one weird faculty member asks you really hard questions, and you're suddenly deflated, and you're like, this was the program that was going to make me the doctor I want to be, but now not so much. And so I think that you have to realize that there's 95% of us are really cool in emergency medicine, and there's a couple of weird people out there. And so don't base your whole opinion of a program based on one odd interaction or kind of, something that seemed a little bit uncomfortable in that regard. I think look at the whole big picture, and the further you can kind of step back, and again, as Michelle said, think about who you want to be as a clinician and who you want to be when you grow up, then you're gonna be able to make that decision a lot more wisely.
Yeah, it's certainly sampling bias, and I think you raise a really great point about not listening to all those rumors that are out on the interview trail, right? So there are other blog sites that are very much driven by student opinion, and when you're out on the trail and the students that are writing for those sites are right in front of you, it's like a live version of that blog site, right? And you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt, because just because somebody liked the program across town doesn't mean that you're going to like that program. I remember when I sat down with my fellow interns after we had matched, we actually compared notes. And, if you didn't come here, where would you have gone? And everyone had sort of the same number 2, 3, and 4. And then I just sort of sat there and I was like, they're number 13, 14, and 15 for me. That seems really odd, right? So was I the odd man out, or did we all just sort of coalesce around this one program? But then, what was important kind of started to vary on our lists. I don't know. John, give me some pearls, pitfalls, very practical advice, again, for that student who has no idea how to start this process. They're overwhelmed.
Sure, and I think just to dovetail on many of the great points that have already been made, I think first and foremost, when you look at the sea of programs where you've interviewed, and so they're sort of eligible to be on your rank list, as Brian alluded to earlier, don't place anything on your rank list where you don't ultimately see yourself being as a trainee there. Because the match is as was pointed out, a bit like Vegas, but fortunately the house always wins, and in this case for our students it's great. The winners, the house is the student applicant, which is a great thing. But at the end of the day, you never ever know where you'll end up. But if it's on your list, you could potentially be there. So if there's some place that just doesn't seem like a great fit for you for whatever the reason, make sure it's not on your list. So make sure everything on your list is just programs where you might like some better than others, but you could see yourself being happy and fulfilled at each of the training programs on your list. And then after that, I think geography is an important factor. Obviously, if there are certain life forces, a significant other that needs to be in certain geographic regions for their job, etc., or someone's pursuing, other interests, significant other, and they need to go to graduate school in a certain area, those are important things as well. But once you get beyond those sort of the rigid, fixed needs to be in certain areas, it really gets down to the 3 Ps for me. And that is, do you jive with the people? Do you like the...
Oh, no.
Oh, well, we lost Jonathan. That was going to be the secret of life, that he was just...
42!
Yeah. All right, so while we're attempting to get him back... is he there? No. All right.
The 5-year-old came in.
And...
Whoa. Michelle, you need to mute that.
Am I muting?
You mute that.
The program fit with...
Wow.
He's muted. All right, who's next?
There we go. No, I'm here. Am I on now?
There you go.
All right. Now, where did you lose me?
You were at the secret of life.
Yeah.
Oh, the secret of life. I can't. So, but anyway, I was talking about the 3 Ps. Did I mention the 3 Ps?
Yep, you finished the first P.
Oh, the first P. So, okay. So, all about the philosophy, the people, the passions of the place. You really, there is no perfect program out there for every individual. But really getting down to those core elements, the things that you're going to be dealing with on a daily basis, so incredibly important. And I always use the example that I was so impressed by many places where I went on the interview trail 15-plus years ago now, that had the shining, sliding glass ICU doors for every ED bay. But at the end of the day, a shiny sliding glass door is not going to be what carries you through training. It really is the people that you're standing shoulder to shoulder with, that you're working with day in and day out, the people who are teaching you the craft of emergency medicine, your co-residents, your colleagues. That to me is the most important thing. And I can say that because we do not have shiny glass sliding ICU doors. We have curtains in our midst here. So.
Well, I was going to say, we trained at the same program, and I don't remember a single door there. So you certainly got over that somewhere on the trail.
Mike, I think there was a barn door at some point, which looks,
I remember a lot of curtains. All right. Brian, take us home here. Pearls and pitfalls. How do you advise this student who just doesn't have a process yet?
Yeah, I think this is actually not as hard as we sometimes make it out to be. I mean, I will sit down with the student and say, give me the name of the person that you love that you share with the most. whoever that person is, whether it's mother, father, spouse, significant other, whatever. Give me the name of that person. Okay, there was at least one program, and probably more, where when you were leaving the interview day, before you ever left the building, you wanted to call that person because you were so excited about that program. That place needs to be one or two on your list, bar none. And that's true all the way across. Everybody has that, and sometimes it's over several months, and you can't always remember it, but you know there was one or two places where before you left the building, you wanted to call that person and say, these people are awesome. This place is outstanding. Those are the places that need to be at the top of your list.
I think that's great. That's a great analogy. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll tell students, take all the rest of them off your list and just take 2 off the pile and just compare those 2 and do some imagery. Get a glass of wine, turn the lights down a little bit in your apartment, and imagine yourself opening that envelope on match day. Keep it above board here, people. And you open that envelope and you're thrilled. That goes up higher. Right? Now repeat the process with 1 more compared to that number 2. Well, I think I want this other one more than that number 2, and that moves up. Now compare that same one to number 1. I still want that one a little bit more. So you start doing that process and eventually come out with a list. And you might have to massage it a little bit as it goes through, and sort of filters will begin applying, but in the end, it kind of gives you some order to begin with, and I like that. If nothing else, your filter is how many times did you call your parents or your partner and talk in the interview. I think that's awesome. I will disagree though with 2 of the comments made earlier, which was make sure that anything you put on your list you're going to be happy to match at, and I think that's a fair piece of advice. If the alternative, if you're only down to 2 things, which is match, not match. Be very careful, because I think that it's emergency medicine or not emergency medicine, because there is no scramble anymore. There are no spots left on soap day. So you really have to be careful that you're not going to have this pool to choose from during soap week, and you have to be comfortable with that decision. And you may choose not to rank a program or 2, but you have to be comfortable with the alternative being you're not going to actually match. That's a somber way to end. All right, Michelle. What final thoughts do you have on this topic before we close the discussion?
Not much. I think everyone hit on exactly the points we were hoping to share. We have some diversity of opinions, but really I think you trust your gut and continue with the theme of all the other hangouts, which is, get a great mentor to kind of bounce ideas off of. And I think that it just wraps it up. I think you guys all hit great points. It's hard to sum up in a pithy sentence. I'm going to throw it back to you, Gisondi.
I was hoping you were going to go the 3 Ps.
I thought about it, but it cut off Jonathan, so I was afraid of getting cut off.
Hey, I'm glad it's going to live in perpetuity on the web now.
I think that's awesome, too. All right, so we're going to close the discussion there, and I want to thank all 3 of our panelists for sharing their time and their thoughtfulness with us and putting up with some technical difficulties as we got going today. But I thought this was a great discussion, and I'm really grateful to each of you for participating. And so grateful that I want to give you a little bit of airtime just simply to talk about how awesome your program is.
This is my favorite part.
I know I was going to do this. This is my favorite part. This is the geeky student coming back out in me. So we're going to start with Colleen.
No, start with somebody else. I haven't done that.
All right, we'll start with Jonathan. We'll come back to Colleen.
All right.
And Jonathan, I was going to say the same thing to Colleen. I visited both of your programs in the last year, so I feel like I know a lot about them, but tell me something that I don't know about Georgetown's program.
Certainly. Well, if I recall correctly, you didn't visit D.C. during the cherry blossom time, so it's always a nice time to come back to D.C. We want to have you back. So we had a great visit, and Mike came and visited both of our programs in 2 consecutive days, which was wonderful. A couple of things about our program is, we've been around for a decade now, but we really like to, even though we have the experience of a decade, we like to consider ourselves a startup mentality and philosophy and approach to things. Very dynamic, and we're constantly evolving and growing, and we really like to maintain that feel and approach to things that we had in our early days as a program. That is being very, very responsive to feedback from our residents, evolving our curriculum to make sure that we're trimming the fat and accentuating the things that work to provide the best training experience for our trainees. Our latest thing that we've really been focusing on the last few years is developing our cadre of fellowships that are out there. And one of the things that really brought me to our training program, 12 years ago, coming from the Bay Area, was the opportunity to start a training program, and it was a great opportunity. People thought I was crazy coming to an academic shop that didn't have a residency program for an academic job. And the reason I came to Georgetown and Washington Hospital Center was the opportunity to potentially create a residency program, which of course we did, just over a decade ago now. So I really feel that we can extend a lot of those same opportunities to our residents, to our junior faculty members. You're not necessarily sixth in line for various opportunities. Often you're first or second in line. We have a lot of faculty members, 60+ strong. So it's a lot of great things going on, very dynamic place, and we encourage you to check us out.
Well, I 100% agree with you. The concept of innovation was there in your program from day one, and you said 10 years your program's been around. You guys now have an annual report that is remarkable with so much information, so many accomplishments. You certainly bring truth to that statement. You guys hit it out of the ballpark from day one. And if I can say a personal note, world, Jonathan was a year ahead of me in residency, and he was always that resident I wanted to be like. So if he's going to be your boss, and if my opinion matters at all, he would be a great boss. So I would highly recommend looking at Georgetown.
Thanks.
All right, Colleen, are you ready?
I guess I am ready.
All right. So I've been to Colleen's home. I know it's in her backyard, and I've certainly seen her program. So work really hard and tell me something I don't know about George Washington.
Well, I guess I can first start that with something you do know, which is that I do have a tiki bar in my backyard, and that gets used for residency events quite often. But I am not a salesman, and I kind of always say this, and I'm a little bit humble in some ways and a little shy about talking about how much I particularly love my program. But I think that the couple of things that makes our program pretty unique is our real, sincere dedication to education. And it's not just the education of residents and students, but we do a lot of education actually within the university itself. And we run, the training center for the whole university for ACLS and PALS and all of that. But we also have a really big international mission, and a lot of our residents have the opportunity to be involved in that. But I think at the end of the day, I kind of come back to GW, and between my friends and my, I think of my faculty as being my friends and somewhat my family, and I think that we have a really good, diverse group of people that we learn from every day, and I think it's one of the things that makes our program pretty unique. One of the best compliments I ever got about my program was from you, Gisondi. When Gisondi came to give grand rounds, he looked out into the audience and said, "It looks like a Benetton commercial here. It's so diverse." And I think that that's one of the things that makes us different, is that we're here to try to make leaders and educators and great emergency physicians, but we need to learn from each other and learn about the world, and as a result, it makes my job really great.
I don't like when people quote me because I can never remember what I said when it started. So, but I do remember that comment, and you guys have such a wonderful, diverse, not only faculty but certainly resident population. I think EM programs struggle trying to reflect the population that they care for, and you guys do it very well, and I think that's awesome. And I'm glad you brought up the tiki bar, because I wasn't going to go there, but let me say, students, that the term professional family has been used in these hangouts before, and the GW professional family is notable. I had the pleasure of being in Colleen's backyard and seeing all her residents have a home-cooked meal by Colleen, and I walked away, and that was really the word that I thought was, this is a very family-like program where Colleen certainly shepherds a great flock. And if you want to be part of something like that, I think you absolutely should check out George Washington.
You're bringing a tear to my eye.
Look at that. All right, good. That's great. That's what I wanted.
Mission accomplished.
All right, so Brian, you guys were the first program, so we all know everything about Cincinnati. Right? So you got to work here and tell the world something we don't know about the University of Cincinnati.
Sure. Well, first and personally, I want to go to Colleen's Tiki Bar too.
Anytime you're in DC.
Right. I mean, I think, as you said, we've been around for a little while, and I think we have disseminated a lot of information about the place. I mean, when you walk in, one of the first things that we greet prospective applicants, prospective residents with is the notion that our mission is to build leaders in emergency medicine. And leaders may be defined in a number of different ways, and they should be self-defined by the residents. And that may be an educator, that may be a clinician, that may be an administrator, it may be a researcher. It's not for me to define that, but ultimately our goal from the day that you enter to the day that you leave is to make you the best that you can be and to sculpt and help you define yourself as a leader in emergency medicine.
Well, no one would argue with that, Brian. I think that your alumni stretch far and wide in the country in true leadership positions in our specialty and have done so for decades and really have made the specialty mature to what it is today. So certainly that is a very true and authentic statement. You guys were in charge on day one, and I think no one would argue that your folks are still in charge all around the country. And again, on a personal note, students, I had the pleasure of watching Dr. Stettler give a lecture just, about 5-6 weeks ago at a regional conference. And speaking of tears, I had tears streaming down my face laughing throughout this entire thing. And my comment walking away was, I'd go work for him just because I could laugh the entire shift while I was learning. And that guy would be great. So I invited him to be on a hangout. So kudos to you, Brian. Kudos to your program. I think it's a wonderful place. And again, students, you should check out the University of Cincinnati. So thanks to all three of our panelists. Michelle, thank you very much for hosting our installment again today. And students, look forward to our next topic coming to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.